that was pushed upon me was the way I had to fight. Good morning, I love you. Because everything that this man said to me was contrary to that. You ain't this, you can't do this, you ugly.
The night Mary J. Blige took the Super Bowl stage in 2022, dressed in white boots and sequins, collapsing theatrically as she belted "No More Drama" to 100 million people, most folks watching had no idea she'd spent years drowning in a kind of pain the camera couldn't catch.
Good morning, I love you. Because everything that this man said to me was contrary to that. You ain't this, you can't do this, you ugly.
This was the woman who taught a generation of black women how to survive heartbreak, addiction, and by singing straight through it, who turned the projects of Yonkers into platinum plaques and Grammy speeches, who made hip-hop soul a genre by refusing to hide the scars. But behind every album that felt like testimony, behind every red carpet smile, there were tax liens stacking up into the millions, a marriage to the man managing her money that would end with her paying him $30,000 a month just to be free, and a debt she later described as hundreds of millions of dollars that nearly buried the queen they all claimed to love.
So I had to fight in my prayer time in the morning with that same kind of fight, that same kind of tactic.
Mary gave the industry her pain, and they sold it back to her at a price she's still calculating. Because sometimes the world doesn't just forget you had it. Sometimes they make you pay for ever believing it was yours. But before the crown, before the platinum plaques and the Grammy speeches, there was just a little girl in Yonkers trying not to disappear. Mary Jane Blige was born in the Bronx in 1971, but it was the Schlobohm houses in Yonkers where she learned what survival actually meant. After her father Thomas, a jazz musician and Vietnam vet with PTSD he couldn't shake, left the family in a storm of violence, her mother Cora packed up Mary and her sister and moved them into the kind of projects where thin walls turned every neighbor's nightmare into your own. Mary grew up hearing women running down hallways in the middle of the night, screaming for help that never came fast enough. She'd sit in the stairwell, small and frozen, listening to fists hitting flesh on the other side of apartment doors, and she'd promise herself she would never be that woman. But trauma doesn't ask permission before it moves in. By the time she was 5 years old, people her mother trusted to watch her had already stolen something she couldn't name yet, leaving scars she'd spend decades trying to sing her way out of. Church was the one place Mary's voice didn't have to compete with chaos. She sang in the choir, that raw gospel rasp already shaking loose from her throat, and for a few hours every Sunday, she could pretend the world outside wasn't trying to crush her. But back in the projects, she was becoming her environment, using alcohol and anything else she could find just to feel a little less like she was drowning. The kids around her were doing the same thing, all of them trying to numb out the same violence, the same poverty, the same sense that nobody outside those gates cared if they made it or not. Then one day, in the late 80s, a teenage Mary walked into a mall somewhere in New York, dropped a few dollars into a karaoke booth, and sang Anita Baker's "Caught Up in the Rapture" over a tinny backing track. The tape that came out was rough, distorted, her voice all jagged edges and longing. But somehow that cheap recording made its way to Jeff Redd, an A&R at Uptown Records, and from there into the hands of Andre Harrell, the executive who was building a whole new sound out of hip-hop and soul. Harrell heard something in that mall booth tape that most people would have missed. Not polish, but truth. Mary didn't know it yet, but that 3-minute recording was about to change her life. What she also didn't know was that the same pain she was trying to escape would become the only thing the industry wanted from her. The rent came due faster than she expected. Inside Uptown Records' Manhattan office in the early 90s, the air was thick with ambition and cigarette smoke. Andre Harrell had built the label into a factory for New Jack Swing and hip-hop soul, and when he played Mary's demo for his young A&R Sean "Puffy" Combs, something clicked. Puffy leaned back in his chair, nodding his head to the beat. and said what nobody in R&B had been brave enough to say out loud yet. They were going to put hood drums under a church voice and let the streets and the clubs meet in the middle. Mary sat on a worn-out couch in an oversized bubble coat, half shy and half ready, watching these men architect a sound that would change music. They weren't just making an album, they were inventing a lane. When What's the 411 dropped in July of 1992, it hit like nothing radio had heard before. Hip-hop beats, rugged samples, rappers sliding in and out of hooks, and Mary's voice sitting right on top of it all. Raw, raspy, unapologetically black and female. The album climbed into the Billboard 200's top 10 and didn't let go, eventually going triple platinum and turning Mary into the face of something the industry was already calling hip-hop soul. She wasn't trying to sound pretty or polished. She sounded like somebody who'd lived through something and survived it, and that honesty connected with people in a way that polished pop stars couldn't touch. Black women especially heard themselves in every cracked note, every ad-lib that sounded more like a prayer than a melody. The press started calling her the Queen of Hip-Hop Soul before she'd even turned 21. Magazine covers, award show stages, interviews where reporters asked her to explain how she made pain sound so beautiful. But behind the scenes, Mary was still that girl from the projects, still trying to numb herself with whatever was in reach. The same people hyping her up, booking her on tour, cashing checks off her name. They made sure she had access to the things that kept her quiet and compliant. Alcohol, bad relationships. As long as she showed up to the studio and delivered, nobody asked too many questions about what it was costing her to sing like that. Surviving it became the art itself. In 1994, Mary walked into a dark studio with sunglasses on indoors, high off something she couldn't name anymore, and started recording an album she later said she wrote because she didn't want to live. My life wasn't just confessional. It was a diary written in real time while the pen was shaking. She was in a relationship, drowning in and alcohol, and every song felt like she was bleeding out over dusty breakbeats and Puffy's production. The engineers could hear it in her voice, how it cracked and split open on certain lines, how between takes she'd lean against the studio wall and go somewhere far away in her head. But when that album dropped in November, it didn't just sell, it became a lifeline. Triple platinum, critics calling it one of the greatest albums ever made. Black women especially held onto it like scripture, playing it in their cars and bedrooms, hearing their own depression and heartbreak reflected back at them for the first time on mainstream radio. While fans were treating my life like a survival manual, Mary was barely surviving the life that inspired it. She's admitted in interviews that she was high and drunk at her first Grammy ceremony in 1995, clutching a drink while cameras flashed and industry people congratulated her. From the outside, it looked like a coronation. From the inside, she felt nothing, just numb and hollow, wondering how long she could keep this up before something inside her finally broke. And the people making money off her pain? They kept her well supplied. As long as she showed up to the studio, hit the stage, and delivered those raw, tear-soaked vocals, nobody asked too many questions about where she went after the lights went down. The albums kept coming, and the numbers kept climbing. Mary, in 1999, debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200 with about 239,000 copies sold in the first week, eventually going double platinum. Then came Family Affair in 2001, her first number 1 single on the Hot 100, a song that made the whole world dance while Mary tried to figure out how to stop using long enough to actually feel the joy everyone else seemed to be having. By the time the breakthrough dropped in 2005, she was untouchable. Over 700,000 copies sold in the first week, debuting at number 1. 3 Grammys in her hands, platinum certifications stacking up like trophies. The world saw a queen. Mary saw a woman running on fumes, signing contracts she didn't understand, trusting people who were more interested in her catalog than her pulse. And through it all, the industry kept telling her she was a star while quietly making sure she stayed just broken enough to keep singing about it. The thing about building an empire on pain is that eventually you have to stop and count the cost. In 2003, Mary married Martin "Can-Do" Isaacs, a music executive who'd been circling her world for years. At first, it felt like salvation. He helped manage her career, encouraged her to step away from the and alcohol that had been drowning her since the beginning, and gave her something she hadn't had in a long time: stability. She credited him in interviews with steering her right, with being the man who finally saw her as more than just a voice to profit from. For a minute, it seemed like Mary had found the partner who could help her make sense of the chaos. But what she didn't see yet was how quickly a savior can become a cage when he's the one holding all the keys. Behind the scenes, the money was moving in ways Mary didn't understand and wasn't being told about. She was performing, recording, touring, signing, but she wasn't asking the hard questions about where the checks were going or who was making the calls. That's how it works when you grow up poor and suddenly everyone around you is wearing suits and talking about handling the business. You trust them because you don't know what you don't know. And for a while, it didn't matter, because the awards kept coming and the stadiums stayed full. Then, the letters started arriving. By 2012, the IRS came knocking with a $3.4 million lien for unpaid federal taxes from 2009 to 2011. Then, New Jersey filed for $900,000 more. Banks were suing over defaulted loans that totaled millions, mortgages on properties she barely remembered signing for. The headlines were brutal. Mary J. Blige hit with massive tax lien. And suddenly, the woman the world had called a queen was being painted as reckless, irresponsible, another cautionary tale about black wealth mismanaged. But Mary wasn't reckless. She'd been trusting people to protect her while they were quietly eating off her plate. In 2013, around the 20th anniversary of her career, she started speaking more openly about the demons she'd been fighting. She talked about the alcohol, the depression that made her want to disappear. She said Whitney Houston's death in 2012 shook her so hard it pushed her back toward sobriety, because she realized she was on the same path and her voice, the one thing she had that was truly hers, wouldn't survive if she kept going. By 2014, she was telling Billboard she was in her second real attempt at getting clean, that recovery was a daily, faith-driven battle, and she couldn't afford to slip again. But sobriety has a way of clearing the fog, and what Mary started to see in that clarity wasn't pretty. The man she'd married, the one who was supposed to be her partner, was also her manager, controlling her schedule, her finances, her access to her own career. And in the quiet moments, over untouched dinners in a house that Gold Records helped buy, intense conversations about money and respect, she was beginning to realize that the person holding her down wasn't the industry anymore. It was the man sleeping next to her. So on July 6, 2016, Mary did what she should have done years earlier. She filed for divorce. The paperwork cited irreconcilable differences, the kind of legal language that sounds sterile and clean until you realize what it's covering up. Mary was walking away from a 13-year marriage to the man who'd been both her husband and her manager, the man who controlled her schedule, her money, and her access to the career she'd built with her own voice. But Can-Do Isaacs wasn't going quietly. Within weeks of the filing, he was in court asking for nearly $130,000 a month in spousal support, arguing that he'd helped build her brand and deserved to be compensated for the lifestyle he'd grown accustomed to. The audacity of it was breathtaking. The man who'd been managing her finances while tax liens piled up was now billing her for the privilege of leaving him. By June of 2017, a judge ordered Mary to pay $30,000 a month in temporary spousal support, plus retroactive payments and about $235,000 to cover his legal fees. $30,000 a month to the man she said had disrespected and torn her down. The headlines were merciless, tabloids framing it like she was the one at fault, like she'd somehow failed him instead of the other way around. And every time she walked out of a courthouse in Los Angeles, sunglasses on and jaw clenched, reporters would swarm her with questions about money and taxes and whether she could even afford the divorce she was trying to survive. What the public didn't fully understand yet was how deep the hole went. The IRS liens, the state liens, the bank lawsuits over defaulted mortgages and loans. It all added up to a financial nightmare that made the spousal support look like pocket change. Properties she barely remembered buying were in foreclosure. Loans she thought someone else was handling had gone unpaid for years. And the man who was supposed to have been steering the ship had either been asleep at the wheel or actively driving it into the rocks. Years later, in a 2023 interview, Mary would admit just how bad it had been. She said she was once in debt to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, a number so staggering it's hard to wrap your head around. She described feeling buried, unable to see a way out, convinced she'd be paying for other people's mistakes for the rest of her life. The woman who'd sold tens of millions of albums, who'd filled arenas and won Grammys and been called a queen for decades, was broke in the ways that matter most. Broke financially, broke emotionally, broke in her belief that the people around her had ever really cared about protecting her. In March of 2018, the divorce was finally settled and legally finalized by June, ending a 2-year battle that had played out in courtrooms and tabloids while Mary tried to hold on to whatever dignity she had left. She'd later describe it as having to cut herself free, like she was trapped in something that was slowly killing her, and the only way out was to chew through the ropes, even if it hurt. And it did hurt, but staying would have been worse. Sometimes the only way to find yourself is to lose everything else first. While the divorce was still tearing her apart in 2017, Mary was in a recording studio doing something she hadn't done in years, singing sober and actually feeling it. Director Dee Reese had cast her in Mudbound, a Netflix period drama about black and white families in the Jim Crow South, and Mary was playing Florence Jackson, a sharecropper's wife whose quiet strength held her family together through unimaginable circumstances. It was a role that required her to dig into a different kind of pain, one that wasn't about toxic relationships or addiction, but about survival and dignity in a world designed to break you. And when it came time to record Mighty River, the spiritual-leaning ballad she co-wrote for the film, Mary stood in front of the microphone with Dee Reese watching from the control room. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't singing to escape. She was singing to heal. On January 23, 2018, Mary made history. She became the first person ever nominated for Academy Awards in both an acting category and a song category for the same film. 2 Oscar nominations. The headlines weren't about divorce settlements or tax liens anymore. They were about a black woman from the projects who'd clawed her way into a space the industry never thought she belonged. She didn't win either award, but it didn't matter. The nomination itself was proof that she was more than the pain people had been profiting from for decades. And she didn't stop there. By 2019, she was playing Cha-Cha, a time-traveling assassin in Netflix's The Umbrella Academy. Then, in 2020, she landed the role of Monet Tejada in Starz's Power Book 2. Ghost, a ruthless queenpin who ran her family's empire with an iron fist. Playing Monet gave Mary a different kind of power. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the one calling the shots, protecting her own, making people respect her name. Off-screen, she was doing the same thing. She'd stopped letting other people handle her money and started treating tax payments like they weren't even hers to touch, setting up systems to make sure she'd never be blindsided again. In June of 2021, Amazon released Mary J. Blige's My Life. a documentary that revisited the album that had nearly killed her. Sitting in front of the camera, barefaced and calm, Mary talked about the years she didn't want to live, the she survived, the addiction that almost took her voice. But she also talked about what came after the divorce, how leaving that marriage was the first time in decades she'd chosen herself, how she finally learned to look in the mirror and say, with humility and conviction, that she was beautiful, strong, and worthy. Not because a man told her, not because the industry needed her to believe it to keep performing, but because she'd earned it by surviving. And when she sang this time, the whole world was watching. February 13th, 2022. SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles. Over 100 million people tuned in as Mary J. Blige stepped onto the Super Bowl LVI halftime stage in white thigh-high boots and a glittering bodysuit, standing shoulder to shoulder with Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Eminem, and Kendrick Lamar. When the first notes of Family Affair hit, the stadium erupted, and Mary moved across that stage like someone who'd earned every single spotlight pointed at her. She later said she chose that song because it invites everyone to let go of their problems for a minute, to just be free. And for those few minutes, that's exactly what she was. Free from the debt, free from the divorce, free from every person who'd ever tried to own her voice. Then came No More Drama. She sang it standing on a white platform, arms stretched wide, before collapsing theatrically as the music swelled around her. It was theater, sure, but it was also truth, the kind of performance that only someone who'd actually lived through the drama could deliver. And when the set ended and the crowd roared, Mary walked off that stage knowing she'd just reminded the world who she was. Months later, that performance would win her an Emmy for Outstanding Variety Special, adding another accolade to a career that refused to be buried. The momentum didn't stop. In 2022, she released Good Morning Gorgeous, an album that felt like a love letter to herself, the kind of project you can only make after you've survived everything designed to destroy you. The industry responded. 6 Grammy nominations for 2023, including Album of the Year and Record of the Year. Time magazine named her one of the most influential people of 2022. She was touring again, filling arenas with fans who'd grown up on her pain and were now celebrating her resurrection. And in 2024, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inducted her, cementing her place among the legends who changed music forever. Meanwhile, she was still playing Monet on PowerBook 2. Ghost, still acting, still creating, still controlling the narrative in ways she never could when other people held the pen. Here's the thing about Mary J. Blige that the industry never quite figured out. She was never supposed to make it this far. Girls from the projects who survive childhood abuse, who battle addiction, who trust the wrong men with their money and their hearts, they're not supposed to end up in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They're supposed to be cautionary tales, footnotes in somebody else's success story, voices that burn bright and fade fast. But Mary turned that script inside out. Her catalog, from What's the 411 through My Life and the Breakthrough to Good Morning Gorgeous, became the blueprint for a whole generation of Black women in R&B who learned they could sing about depression and survival without apologizing for it. Critics now frame My Life as one of the most important explorations of Black women's mental health ever put on a mainstream album, a record that gave permission for artists like Summer Walker, H.E.R., and SZA to make vulnerability their superpower. But Mary's legacy isn't just musical. It's a masterclass in what it costs to be visible, to be profitable, and to still walk away with your soul intact. She stands as proof that you can claw your way out of hundreds of millions in debt, leave a marriage that's killing you, and rebuild on your own terms. Her story is a warning too, about what happens when you let other people control your money, when you trust the industry to protect you instead of protecting yourself. The fans who grew up with her music, especially Black women who saw their own pain reflected in hers, still treat her catalog like family heirlooms, streaming the songs that got them through their darkest nights and showing up to her tours decades later because they know she gets it. From the Yonkers projects to Oscar nominations, from tax liens to the Super Bowl stage, from addiction to sobriety, from giving her voice away to finally owning every note, Mary's journey is now canon. The kind of story that reminds you survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about deciding who gets to tell your story when it's all said and done. Mary J. Blige didn't just survive the music industry. She made them pay to hear her tell the truth about what it costs. And that voice, raw and unbreakable, is still the one thing they could never own.